Oh no, I see it on the top left corner. Sorry, it says it's
No,
recording.
it says recording, so I
Okay,
figure anything I say can be used against me now. So
exactly. You better be careful. Okay, so hi, Randy. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for agreeing to be on the podcast today.
you're welcome. You're welcome.
So just to get started, I've been following your material for quite some time, so I really appreciate you being here. But for those who don't know you, how did you end up as a mentor in trading psychology? What's your background a little bit?
Well, I was a therapist, and I was actually doing a retreat. And by that time, I'd really been branching out of clinical work and moving into really performance work. And there was a guy in one of my workshops, and afterwards he came up and says, "I'm having some performance issues in my business, and I was wondering if you might be able to help me." Started talking, and he said, "Yeah, I run a hedge fund. I have two partners in it." And I literally said, "What's a hedge fund?" At that time, that's 15, 20 years ago now. And from there, that's when it started growing. And within a couple years, he had referred enough people to me, and I'd beginning to start growing. And we started realizing that we actually liked working with traders a lot more than we liked working. I liked working with clinical people.
Hmm.
Is traders, once they get the idea that the mind they brought to trading is not going to be the one that's going to bring them success, and they bang their head up against the wall enough, is that they are ready to work. And I'm highly motivated by people who want to improve and change. So that's how it got started.
What interests me is when that first person came to approach you, I feel like where is the point where where a trader decides, I need help. I need help beyond the technicals. Because I think in my experience and with some of the people that I've come across, it seems to take quite a bit of time to realize that the textbook is not your answer. And so why does it take so long to realize it? And what is that switch where you suddenly realize that you have to go find help to fix yourself and it's not about the charts and the textbooks?
There's an enormous bias that we inherit from our evolutionary psychology, that we know how to do this, we can do this. It's really positivity bias. And what we do is we get into trading and we keep hammering, keep doing all the things that have maybe led us to success, the hard work, the stuff upper lip and stuff like that. And we get into trading, and that bias is still there. It's instinctual. Okay. And generally it takes getting bloodied pretty good.
Hmm.
Probably the people I work with have been on an average trading for 4 or 5 years, where they know how to trade. They just don't know how to trade when the money's real.
Right.
And what they recognize is that for them to go from paper to real, there's something about the brain. And I don't even start with it's the trader's problem up here. No, it's the brain that we inherited from our caveman ancestors. It wants to win because it had to. If it didn't win, it became somebody else's meal. And so, winning and not losing, and particularly if you think about it, not losing to one of our caveman ancestors was to be consumed. And so, of course you don't want to lose. And so you begin to see this cycle, and a lot of people never give up that I can do this myself. I can do this. I can make it happen. And I wish them well. It's been a long time since once I get it that these people aren't ready yet, I look at them and say, they just need to cook more. It's just, and some people recognize it early. I've had actually a couple of my best clients have been, from my standpoint, kids, like 25, 26-year-old kids. And they recognize that what was standing in between them and what they wanted to accomplish with their lives was the psychology they were bringing into the moment of working with uncertainty. And they just basically said, I want to be able to learn how to do this. And they took it seriously, and they were able to evolve their brain to where it could handle uncertainty rather than being scared of uncertainty. Mm-hmm. But it 3 to 4 to 5 years is very common.
Yeah, my experience is, I think early on, most most of the answers are technical. Like you realize from a textbook or from a mentor, it's like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Now I realize I took the wrong entry. And eventually, as you get better, you create a trade plan, and it's like, okay, if I do this, this, and this, then it makes sense. But then you start to realize I'm still not doing this, this, and this. Why am I not doing it? Like I'm supposed to click the button, but I'm not. That's for me when I started realizing there's something missing. Like I don't feel like sometimes I'll take a trade and then it seems like it's someone else doing it. And then half an hour later, I'll come back and I'll be like, I know I'm not supposed to do that. So why am I doing that? And that's when I started to realize, like, on paper, I know what I'm doing. And I know if I do this over and over again, I'll be okay. But for some reason, I'm not doing it. And then you start to realize it's not the technicals, it's me, and I have to fix myself.
Yeah. I think it's a lot, to be honest with you, if you take a look at a really high-end racing team, is that you see the driver, and he's sitting in a car that probably costs several $1 million or more. And then they have all this team around him. And if you put me in a car like that can go 250 miles an hour, I mean, you're wasting your time. You know, I don't want to have those skill sets. Right. But even if I did, I would never be able to get the performance out of there that the machine's capable of. Right. And I relate that to the trader, to the methodology, is that you can run and finally build a methodology. But if you don't have the right driver of that technology, if that driver doesn't have an edge himself, the edge you have in your methodology is worthless.
I like that analogy. Yeah, that makes sense. I heard once, I'm not sure when it was where it was, but it was early on in my trading career. And it was a mentor who asks his student, he says, how much of trading do you think is psychological versus technical? And the student, I think, trying to be smart, said, oh, I know 80% is psychological. And the mentor says, then how come you don't spend 80% of your time working on the psychological part? You spend 100% or 80% on the technicals. And I think when I think about that for myself, I have some daily routines and rituals for myself for the mental side, but it's not directly related to trading how you describe it in your book and in your work. So I've realized that you have to really focus in on the mental side, not just yourself in terms of what you do on a daily basis, but how it relates to trading during the trading day. What are your mental rituals and psychological rituals for trading? So can you talk, like 4 years ago, me, who didn't believe that there was a psychological side to trading. And I think many people are there who don't think that that's an issue. What evidence can you share, and what can you share from your work and your experience with traders to convince them that this is a real problem? This is really something that you need to focus on and fix.
Your P&L statement. Period. You know, if you have the assumption in my work is that the P&L statement is a reflection of the beliefs you have about your ability to manage the challenges of uncertainty, how effective it is for extracting more capital out of the markets than you're putting back in. And if you're looking at it and you know your game in terms of I know this is the methodology I need to be using, it gives me an edge. And then if you're looking at it and saying you're not doing it, your trading account's telling you the truth. And if you can't believe your trading account, certainly you're not going to believe me. Okay. My job is say, take a look at your trading account, ask how healthy it is, and start really looking at it and seeing really good traders. They do not have a problem with taking losses. You know, they don't have a problem with of hitting their targets. They don't have problems with entry. In fact, they know that in order to be able to take your system's edge, you should be taking at least 80% of the valid setups that are coming your way, or you mess with the edge. You mess with the numbers that generate edge. And if you're not doing that, that's going to be reflected in your trading account. So I'm not trying to sidestep your question, but no, I refer to look at your trading account. That's the truth meter. You don't believe a word your mind tells you.
True.
Look at your trading account.
And so for those traders, would you say to differentiate between, is this a psychological issue or is this an edge issue, that should be done through journaling, where you have to have proof of an edge first. And if you do have an edge on paper, and you're still not able to capitalize from the markets, then it's psychological. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean,
Right.
you're looking at a lot of people, will back test, they will paper trade, they will do all that stuff to be able to find their edge, work out, and also just work out the intricacies of how to execute. And that's well and good. But at the same time, is that once you can do that, once you're profitable on paper, everything else is psychological.
Hmm.
And I'd like to put it this way. I never liked the quarterback Tom Brady. Okay. But what I've come to admire is that his mind is always right when game time is on. And Russell Wilson the same way. And you're looking at these guys, and Russell Wilson's a short little guy to be an NFL quarterback. And then what you discover is that it's not an accident that their mind is right on game day. LeBron James practices tremendous discipline to maintain the mind that performs at the level he does. You're looking at these top level athletes, and like if you take golf, when you see a PGA tournament, everybody out there can drive like crazy. They can putt like crazy. Yet there's only 10 big time money winners.
Hmm.
And what those guys do, and you start discovering, they're bringing their sports psychologists with them. Okay. And they're going through the rounds. They're making sure their mind's right. They're just all that stuff, because ultimately what happens is that the top money winner recognizes that it's not about winning and losing. It's about performing. That guy, that golfer, knows that he can't control the weather. He can't control the fans. He can't control if another player is having the best game of his life. What he can control is the mind that he brings to hitting that little ball with a club. That's all he can control. All the rest is rock and roll. All the rest is story.
Hmm.
And what he's done is he's realized that he's the one inventing the story about his performance rather than his winning or losing.
So let's say from the athlete analogy and a trader, moving over to a trader who has their edge down. What happens, like when I said the example of me, I feel like someone else took control of my mouse, and traders whose emotions get the best of them. What's actually happening biologically, psychologically, when you feel like you have strict rules to follow, but you can't? What's happening?
In a lot of my webinars, I use a particular graph that actually shows neural information coming into the nerves to the brain, or actually coming to what is known as the sensory thalamus. And if you can imagine the thalamus as a air traffic controller, there's all these planes flying around, stuff like that. And what this guy's doing is, based on priority, he's ordering those planes around in the sky. And if an emergency comes up, what that air traffic controller's doing is he's routing everybody away, and then he's landing that one plane. In trading, what happens is that when information comes in, like the trade's going against you. Now understand, filtered through the caveman brain, that's a biological threat staring you in the face. That air traffic controller takes everything away and stops the communication of that information getting to the new brain thinking that you desperately want in the trading. And what it does is that depending on the level of threat perceived, the thalamus can just cut off information route to the thinking brain. And what it does is it sends it over to the amygdala. And from the amygdala, that lights up, and before you know it, you have just hijacked all thinking.
And the amygdala is a fear.
That's the kind of the center of emotion, and it's built around fear. Yeah. And all of a sudden, caveman lights up, and you're looking at that, taking a loss. Oh my God, I can't do that. Caveman brain's taken over, and it's thinking, I'm being consumed. I have to fight back. And all that thinking, all that great technology, all that methodology, all that investment you've made just blows out the window as if it were never there. The key is that if you were to see an emotion as a train, a freight train, is that the caboose way on the end is really the thinking brain. It really doesn't have much to do with anything. It makes up some stories and gossip and stuff like that. The locomotive, that's your emotional brain. That's that thalamus and all that stuff together. And the engineer driving that train are the beliefs you have about your ability to manage uncertainty. That's what it's like. Thinking is highly overrated. The thinking brain produces alibis, fiction, stories to support whatever the emotional brain's already decided in that moment. And the problem is that emotions are built for short-term survival. And that's why you're sitting there and you know what the rules are and stuff like that. And all of a sudden it flips on you, you go tilt and you're doing something else. You just experience a hijacking. That's what you've done. It's that the information got to the that air controller and the thalamus, and all of a sudden it perceives danger. It cut off communication to the thinking brain, sent the stuff. And by the way, on the low road down to the amygdala, that's nanoseconds. Communication going from the thalamus to the thinking brain is microseconds. What that means is the chemistry of the emotion is already in the brain before the signal, the information gets to the thinking brain. You're cooked. And again, that's what's happening to you. And you have to learn to slow that down. And it's not going to happen because you wish. It's not going to happen because you're big and tough and can just close emotions down. Emotions can turn into an 800-pound gorilla really easy.
So when you feel like you're being taken over, hijacked, is that, if I'm hearing you correctly, that's your body and your mind protecting yourself in the short term from discomfort. And it's forgetting about all the planning you've done for the future. It's just thinking, this is uncomfortable. I don't like this. There's a threat here. And it's just trying to get you out of the trade or not trade, or just save you from the discomfort in the moment.
That is your ancient emotional mammalian brain. And it just so happens that it cuts off interaction going toward the thinking brain, and it acts on an instinctual level. And understand this, again, the brain can't tell the difference between money and life. It can't see money. It has a symbolic representation that money represents power, your ability to control outcome, your ability to be safe, and your ability to predict what the animals are going to do so you can be there and get them. Basically predict entry point. Okay? And that's what it's all about. And in the moment that you think that you're different, and if you can't control, and if you were looking at a heart rate while you were hijacked, what you would notice is that you would be in a range like this that allows you to trade the way you need to be trading with a level head. And then you would see a blip in your heart rate. That's the emotion starting a chain reaction that's going to take, again, the thinking brain offline. And I don't care who you are. That's the way it happens. There are some people. I have a friend who is one of the most extraordinary traders around today. And to prove it, in the last 3 years, he's made over $180 million. That puts him in rare country. And interestingly, it came to a point for him where he said, Randy, I know exactly where it happened with me. Is I had lost $750,000. And I found myself scared about what I'm going to tell my wife, blah, 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 all the stuff that, and there was just a moment that flashed for him. And he said, you know something, whether or not I win or lose, I'm good. I'm okay. What happened at that particular moment in time is what has to happen with every trader, is that winning and losing, you begin to realize, is that winning is really only landing on the right side of probability. And it can become dangerous if it makes you feel good. That's euphoria. That gets you believing that the good times are going to roll on. You got it. You know what you're doing. And losing is only landing on the wrong side of probability relative to your position. It's nothing about your being. And what I like my traders to do is to have a sense of what I call their inherent worth. And that can be done biologically. It doesn't have to be done spiritually, of where you're recognizing that when you see the care that a family has for kids or the care that a group has for its individuals, what you're looking at is the people in that group see the inherent worth of the other. I used to work a lot with the recovery community when I was back in the good old days. And what you discover is in AA, the whole point is to help the person not take the next drink. And they will go off on 12-step calls in the middle of the night to help somebody stop that.
Right.
Why? Because they perceive the inherent worth in the other individual, and they're willing to move mountains to the best of their ability to help them stop that. That's that inherent worth, and it lives within all of us, but most of us have equated mattering with making money, of, not losing. And as long as you have that way of equating mattering with money, is the trading gods are going to be really cruel to you. What happens is that you have no control over whether or not you win or lose. You have a lot of control about the mind you bring into that moment. And I don't understand why people don't jump on this work or similar work to be able to build a mind that can perform in the middle of chaos. I don't understand it, but they don't want to do it. Most likely it's because they want to be in control. And what happens is that they would have to acknowledge they're not in control if they sought help. So they have to get it. You have the trading account will tell you that your ego really gets in the way of you becoming a better trader.
Why? There's so much uncertainty everywhere. Why is it that trading is the one thing that will get you? Like, every single trader seems to have to go through this part of the journey. Why is the uncertainty in trading so conducive to you realizing that you're not in control and you need help? Like, why is it about, what is it about trading?
I liken it to karma. Okay, is that we hear about karma, and it takes lifetimes, it takes all sorts of time for whatever goes around to come around. You can produce denial. You can just happily push that away because it's so far away. The brain can pretend it never happened. And trading it's more like instant karma. Is like the trading is so fast,
right,
that the brain just can't put it and make another alternative explanation that more fits your ego. No, what happens is, boom, it's just right there, and it's undeniable.
That's a good point.
That's also why I believe that trading is one of the most direct routes to self-mastery there is. If you can't produce self-mastery in trading, then you're not going to be a very good trader. You have to master the self.
And so, yeah, I've heard you say, conquer the self to master the markets. I want to talk about conquering the self in a little bit. First, I wanted your take on thoughts and emotions. So you said something really interesting. I really liked it, and it resonated with me. You said that thoughts are simply emotional programs that are given voice in your mind.
Yeah.
They're not you, and they are your feelings represented in words. And so, for me, the example I gave earlier, where the reason I'm moving my stop, or I'm taking a bad entry, or I feel like I'm chasing, or I'm exiting too early, in that moment, I'm convinced. There's something in my head, there's a voice in my head that's really convincing, and it feels rational at the time. It's
it
only
does.
words where you're like, that wasn't me, and that doesn't make any sense. So can you talk a bit about how the emotions are hijacking you through your thoughts, and talk a bit about possible solutions to that disconnecting from those thoughts?
Well, first of all, I think it really begins with separating emotion from thought. Is that all thinking is emotional state dependent. And understand that thinking brain is making up alibis and fictions to support whatever the emotional brain has already decided. So yeah, of course you're going to be thinking irrational and all that kind of stuff, because you wouldn't know that you're an irrational mind or not. You're just sitting there and you haven't learned how to produce an observer that can really look at yourself. And before you know it, you have an emotional brain that somewhere, people don't really know when, but a small tumor started to grow off that emotional brain. That was the emerging thinking brain. It grew and it grew and it grew and it grew into this where we're Homo sapiens now. And, women have to have specialized medical care for pregnancy and delivery because for us to walk upright and have this big gigantic brain, the pelvic area had to shrink to be able to handle that. And all of a sudden, we just became animals that were very different than anything had ever been seen. But in the consequence, though, is that there is a rich communication network going from the emotional brain into the thinking brain. But in the analogy from the thinking brain, the new kid on the block, there is two 19th century telegraph lines going back into the emotional brain. Therefore, if you excite the emotional brain, the telegraph lines get hacked and you end up doing stupid things. And the key is that if you grasp that cognition and emotion are parts of one another, you begin to go, well, what I really need to be then is I need to be managing the emotions that create the emotional soup from which thinking comes. And that's really what the problem is. Everybody wants to be a winner and a not loser. And it just so happens that's not an emotional cocktail that's going to produce the mind that works in uncertainty. It would alleviate a lot of suffering that traders do, but it is what it is.
And so can you talk a bit about fears, like the different types of fears? Can you name some of the most common ones? Fear of missing the trade and losing the profits that you have, just so that anyone who's struggling with those things might recognize it in the way that you describe it. And can you talk about how it hijacks us, and then we can start moving into possible solutions.
Yeah, understand that all fear boils down to the fear of losing your life. That's the bottom line. And it starts manifesting. A lot of people have problems. And I want to give you from kind of a evolutionary psychology perspective, is that a lot of people have problems getting into trades. A lot of people start having dread when they get up out of bed and start heading toward the trading room and stuff like that. And they finally get in, they turn the machines on. I've actually had to start there, turning the machines on and regulating the self so you can move forward. What's really happening is the brain is having, it's fearing that it can die. Understand, it doesn't recognize money. It recognized power. And what happens if you take a loss, you lost your power, you're dead. So from its standpoint, from an evolutionary standpoint, stopping you from getting in the trade is actually a very successful short-term solution.
It's doing its job.
It's doing the survival brain's job. And it just so happens it does it so well that it locks into habit and it's automatic then. And from there, and then what the other big deal is that once you get into the trade, there is a shift. And it's a shift. The moment that you place your order and there is order fill, most people absolutely have they do not manage the mind at that critical moment. And you're actually moving from being an offensive coordinator in American football when you're looking to get in a trade because you're looking to exploit opportunity. But when you get in the trade and start managing it, you take on the mentality of a defensive coordinator. You're trying to keep the losses small. 2 or 3 yards on a run's one thing, but them breaking a big loss, So you're looking at it and you're going, well, what happens is in there, you already have a fear that it's going to be taken from you when it's bouncing and stuff like that. And you're scared for your life. The caveman is. It's activated. And by the time something helped, and then it starts really going against you, starts really getting near your stop, And, you know, caveman's going to go, well, I don't want to, I have a fear of losing, because if I lose my life. I can't do that. And so you try to make the money back. You start revenge trading. But let's just say you get past that and you actually hit profit. You're in the money. Skinny, but you're money. At that particular time, a lot of people call it FOMO. I call it scarcity thinking. You become scared that what you have will be taken from you. I have a ton of people who that fits with them a lot better, particularly if they came out of a scarcity mentality thinking. I'll give you an example. I worked with a woman that grew up on a 40-acre farm in Wisconsin, and the farm's too small to really support the family, and they were always in fear of the bank foreclosing on the farm and stuff like this. They're always, and this woman would watch her father's after dinner sweat, literally trying to figure out who he could pay. This woman quite naturally grew up in an environment of scarcity thinking.
Right.
So she becomes a proprietary trader. They tell her, you're leaving too much money on the table. If you can't solve this problem, we can't have you trading here. And it comes down to the limbic learning from it's going to be taken from me. And of course, when you hit profit, you're going to take the skinny profit. And then you see the thing go to target and beyond and stuff like that, and you beat yourself up. But no, what happens is it has more to do with you being the lack of you being an observer, noticing that the survival brain's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. If you want to change the way it engages uncertainty, that uncertainty between profit and potential, then you're going to have to be able to learn to cool that brain down, and you're going to have to reorder the mind that engages the uncertainty. Mm. And then, to me, it's when you win, nobody thinks of that as a problem. It's a big problem. I once was in China, and I was in a big, huge fund, and they had an auditorium, and both money managers, portfolio managers, and traders were there, about 200 people in there. And I'm explaining that you're not allowed to feel good when you win. And a guy who could speak English says, but I like feeling good. And I said, well, you can do it. You go do something and anything, but when you come back to trading, the mind goes back to disciplined impartiality. You don't feel good. And he got up and left, as did about 50 other Chinese people get up and left. And it didn't bother me. I'm going, well, this is really weird. I've never seen this before. 2 days later, I'm still there, and there's a 2.5% correction in their markets. That guy comes back to me and says, I now understand. Mm-hmm. He says, I could have seen that coming if only I had the eyes to see it. But I was feeling too good.
I love that.
And so the thing is, it's just not all about fear. It's also about winning, because winning unleashes all this stuff. Look at me. I've got power. I've got prestige. You know, I've got safety. I've got all those things that having capital actually means at the very bottom of it. And so you're looking at it. So when you take the loss, most people look at it and they can usually handle 1, maybe 2, but then 3, 4. And what happens is, to the primitive brain circuits, this is getting clawed to death. And soon, before you know it, it's reared its ugly head, and it wants to do revenge trading or trading to make up for prior losses. Can't be done.
So this idea that your emotional component of you, of what it means to be human, it's working on its autopilot to say, there's a threat here, you need to leave. But the brain is converting that emotion into, I see resistance, or this doesn't look like the perfect setup. And it'll rationalize that feeling to find its way out with a skinny profit.
Yeah. That's what the thinking brain does.
Right.
It creates fictions, it creates alibis, it creates anything to do to support what that caveman brain has concluded. That's why you really need to pay attention to how you develop the mind for trading, understand this, is that from a neurobiological sense, thinking is an electrical behavior. And it lights up all this stuff and creates emotional responses. And let me also, what people really don't grasp is what an emotion is. And neurobiology, if you start getting around the people who have really built this thing up, is emotions are not feelings. Emotions are actually biological action potentials that are activated when there are changes in the environment. And those biological action potentials, when activated, become energy. And that energy is telling you to do something. And the three primary ways that it's going to do something is to attack, revenge trading, avoid, don't get in the trade, or approach. What we're trying to do is we're trying to be able to regulate the self and create the self so that approach motivation, where you approach uncertainty with curiosity, with stableness, is there. And that allows you to use the thinking mind, thinking brain, to be able to make decisions rather than the emotional brain. But you have to train yourself for it. And those emotions, once you recognize, oh, they're biological action potentials, and they automatically fire when there's a change in the environment, and they're firing in nanoseconds, long before you can think.
So when you say that, and you said before that emotional state triggers, determines perception, which determines your reality. So does that mean that if you haven't calibrated and integrated your emotional state, and you are looking at the chart, if you feel fear, then your siren's going to go off for every bar, and you're going to see what's scary about it, because your mind is now primed to see threat. So you'll see
looking for threat. Yeah.
You'll see a different chart than you would if you were in a state of curiosity or openness to uncertainty. Is that?
Oh my God. This actually happened a couple of weeks ago, is that a guy that I work with had himself maintained, and he was looking at his charts. Okay. Then he took a call that had really bad news. His daughter was in trouble. Okay. And he came back, and obviously he's no longer in the same emotional state of mind he was before the call. He sees the chart. This is 15, 20 seconds. He sees a completely different outlook. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now that's a dramatic example of how you change the emotional state. You change the perception, but that's happening all the time.
Right.
And we're the animals who can manage that. My dog will never be able to do that. You know, a human, my view is you can stay a really smart mammal, or you can really tap into your human potential and go beyond that. Trading, unless you win the genetics lottery, it occasionally happens. You're going to have to rebuild the mind, rebuild the brain, to do something that is its worst nightmare. It wants control over outcome, and there is no control over outcome. It wants to be able to predict outcome, predict what's going to happen. And so you're taking a brain built for one thing, and you're asking it to do something completely different. And until you get that, until you learn how to actually regulate the emotions so that you're actually bringing the emotions together to produce the mind that observes and calculates, I wouldn't trust that reality being created at all. Mm-hmm. And there's a saying in neurobiology that you have never experienced reality. When you're looking at those charts, you've never experienced reality. What you're experiencing is your brain creating a symbolic representation of that information based on the biases, beliefs, and assumptions that are guiding the brain and interpreting things. So if you're growing up with scarcity thinking, if you're growing up with a mind that has to win, all that stuff, what you're doing is you're saying, oh, that's the bias I'm bringing.
Right.
And that's not the bias that's going to win in trading. It can do it in business. I know plenty of alphas who have made lots and lots of money in business and then come over to trading and think, well, I've got capital now. I can learn this business and everything's going to be great. And they overtrade and blow up a fortune. So they only have a small fortune left, or worse.
I think what people need to hear is like, okay, I have a problem, and now what do I do about it? So,
Yeah.
so, how does someone start that process of taking care of their mind and getting their mind right for trading? So, what would you say to someone who's looking for help and they're looking for rituals or daily practices that could help them get to this point?
My work, if you start taking a look at other people's work and mine, what you'll find is that mine is foundational. What I'm looking to do is to go to the core beliefs that are limiting your ability to manage uncertainty and change them at a very core level. That's and I come from that, and I understand. I cut my teeth on violent prisoners, the anger management with violent prisoners. I cut my teeth on at-risk youth. And when I was running groups, my referral base was criminal court, juvenile court, DSS, and just I was interesting stuff. And what I discovered is a lot of the typical therapies that we do in group and stuff like that simply were ineffective at that level. And that's what moved me over to emotional intelligence and neurobiology as I began to understand, oh, this is happening at a limbic belief level, and trying to think that you can hocus pocus and retrain the subconscious mind by blah, 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 blah. Keep at it. Just keep on it. And, and to believe that you can just use affirmations. I'm a disciplined trader. I'm a disciplined trader. I'm a disciplined trader. And then get blown apart by a caveman in the back of your brain who comes up like that. But more than anything, it's where you need to start. Is just beginning to observe your body while you trade. I'm astounded when people say, Randy, I had no idea. My body was so tense and I wasn't breathing. And I'm going, well, if you understand an emotion as a biological action potential, where do you think the emotion is going to manifest? In your body. If you learn to breathe diaphragmatically during risky moments in trading, you will take a lot of the acceleration of the emotion to a critical moment where it takes over. You will hold it back so that you can maintain critical thinking skills. The same thing with tension in your body. You're actually feeling emotional arousal when you're doing that. It's cranked. The trigger has happened. The emotion is out. It's out. It's growing and getting ready to just take your body someplace. And if you can do that, if you can train yourself for diaphragmatic breathing, I call it bellows breathing, and it's the first thing that happens both in my group courses and in my individual work. You're going to have in my group course, most people sign up for my courses between a month and 2 months early, because that's how long it takes to start habituating a new way of breathing in the presence of uncertainty.
So is diaphragmatic breathing something that traders should do while they're in those states of stress?
They should do it all the time. What happens is when you're facing uncertainty, you're triggering the stress response, and you're automatically moving up the scale to where you're beginning to activate not just the mind, but to activate the body. There is a sweet zone of arousal that's needed to be able to have the cognitive mind really keen and ready to go, but the body not triggering and beginning to ramp up for action. And it's that area where when you do that, you can get a fairly clean mind. You probably still have some faulty beliefs that need to be worked on. But people are blown away by, I have people videotape themselves in my work, and they're just simply blown away by what they see. And it's pretty scary. But that was, to me, it's the first thing. And what's also, you can do it anything off the shelf, is that, the second, and by the way, that breathing, the Hindus started that about 4,000 years ago. So it's not new technology. Okay. And then another Hindu, Siddhartha, the Buddha, created mindfulness. And that's been around for 2,500 years. So it's not like I've got cutting edge technology. All of my stuff is cutting edge technology. But there's various ways that you can learn to really begin to recognize that you and your thoughts are not the same. That you're not having thoughts, they're having your experience. And as you step back and become more mindful, and you say, I'm going to take a mindful mind into trading, I'm going to do diaphragmatic breathing all the way through trading, particularly in the moments that I anticipate I will be having problems. I mean, if you have problems with entry or hitting a profit target, and you have those all the time, it doesn't take much rocket science to figure out that you need to start cooling down a long time before you get to the problem, because the problem probably happened a lot earlier than you thought. And by the time you're hijacked, I mean, the parade's already happened. Okay. But those are the two things. And it's, I also teach in mindfulness, I also teach to become aware of what I call the inner critic inside your head. And that's all the criticism. That's all the judgment. That's also all the, go ahead, get it. You can do it. You can do it. That's what I would call temptation. And it's just simply a part of the mind. It's not going to go away. Various cultures and various traditions have interpreted it differently, but they're all trying to make sense of how this destructive part of the mind and this constructive part of the mind weave and ebb. And unless you start becoming a student of it, it's not necessarily going to weave and ebb when you want it to. It'll do it when it wants to.
Sure. And there's something you said earlier that I found really interesting, and I haven't really heard that in that context before. We're always so focused on trying to deal with losses, and you brought up you have to learn to not get too happy or not get too excited when you win.
Oh, absolutely.
How does one kind of stay measured when they win, to remember that it's just landing on the right side of probability? What's kind of a reminder or something that they can stay grounded? What can people do?
What I'm teaching is that, there is a full practice of actually anticipating winning. And then as you win, to be able to actually see the historical way that you perceive that and you react to that. And it's pretty hard not to feel happy. Okay. At the same time, what happens is you have to train yourself as you move into that moment. And I have a fairly elaborate process that I use for people approaching victory. Okay. And then having victory, and then not allowing themselves, a lot of it is this: I just landed on the right side of probability. That's all I did.
Just a reminder.
That's all I did. I didn't, I haven't exploded into a superhuman being. I just landed on the right side of probability. And it's actually probably when I first start working with people can't imagine any problems beyond fear. And what they do is they start trading better and they start winning. And it's kind of like I try to warn them that this is a really serious place here. It's the next step up. And everybody has to go through that. I started winning and started feeling good. And basically they're getting a dopamine rush is what they're really getting.
Right.
And it makes them snort cocaine, kind of figuratively. And what happens is that it ends up with a very negative result. You end up with a mind that is not capable of working in probability. And ultimately, it's soothing and calming yourself. And if you need to, quit trading for a moment, go outside, exercise to burn the chemistry
Hmm.
of victory out. And after you burn that chemistry out, come back and, get the mind right to go trade again. But yeah, you just don't, you whoop it up after the day's over.
Yeah, I actually love that, because when you take a loss, the first thing you want to do is you want to get rid of that feeling. You don't want to feel bad. But when you make money, you feel good. You want to sit with it. You want to feel like you did something, that you did something valuable, that you won. And no one
That's
thinks,
very animal. That's very
yeah,
animal of you
exactly.
too. Okay.
And no
And
one thinks about what you're saying, that hey, you're landing on the right side of probability, which is not something to celebrate. It's just a feeling in your body. You have to get grounded and remember that this is a probability game. I love that.
and feeling is the chemistry of the emotion in the body doing its work. And that's when you get when you feel it, that's when you feel certain that it's right. And you no longer doubt it.
Mm.
And
Awesome.
we see that in operation right now with the kinds of misinformation coming out now. And people, based on their belief systems, are believing it with certainty or not believing it with certainty.
Right.
And if you start believing misinformation as the truth, I wouldn't trade. It just simply wouldn't be. It wouldn't be a fruitful way for you to work.
And in this case, in this context, are you referring to misinformation as the story that your body is telling you, that your emotions telling
The
you?
story that's happening in the mind.
Right.
There's a lot of when you learn to become mindful, you're going to discover there is a lot of misinformation running around in the mind. And if you can handle the discomfort and step back out of it and begin to observe it, you can begin to see, oh my God, there is no evidence at all to support this. And
Mm.
even if there is some evidence to support an assessment, the assessment is an assessment. It's not a characterization of your being.
Right.
And that's something you learn through mindfulness. Oh yeah, this stuff's running through your mind anyway. A lot of misinformation's running through your mind. And unless you become the vigilant about it, then it's going to continue running through your mind, and your brain's not built to check it out. It's going to believe in superstition, because ultimately you do not see something and then believe it. You believe something and then you see it.
Mm.
And if information comes in contrary to that belief, you'll distort the information to support the belief.
Right.
That's how dangerous beliefs are. You have to be careful which ones are basically creating your destiny.
Awesome. Okay, so just to finish off, can you tell people where they can find you if they want to learn more about how to change those belief systems? Where can they get to know more about your work and find your courses and your education?
My website, that's traderstateofmind.com, and from there you can also go and get to my YouTube channel, or you can go if you go to YouTube, type in Randy Howell. You will find more videos, and I don't know, I started to say more than you could ever imagine, but I have people who do Randy Howell weekends and all this kind of good stuff, and they meet me and they say, oh my God, you're just like on the videos. Duh. But no, the thing is, the website is a very, very information-rich website. And it's a good way of really diving into this, because I know a lot of, particularly speaking from the emotional intelligence and neurobiological and quantum type theories, a lot of it, people hear this and go, oh my God, what on earth is going on? This is no longer even cutting edge neurobiology. In the 1980s, it was cutting edge. Now, people have started really going to this. They understand. I mean, emotional intelligence work is embedded in advertising now, where they're looking to find emotional motivators. They're not looking to hear what you have to say, and so my website is a great start, and there's a free book there that you can download. And if you get really interested, get my book. And the main thing is kick tires around and begin watching the videos. That's the best way to do it. It'll give you a lot to think about.
Awesome. So I'll link your website, and I'll share your YouTube information as well. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for your time.
It's
Um,
been fun. I've
yeah,
really enjoyed it.
yeah, it was really good, and a lot of stuff. I've watched a lot of your videos, and there's some stuff here that for some reason flipped a switch for me. So I appreciate
Well, then I'm honored.
that.